A couple months ago, I made a video ranking the most underrated creatures in Ark, and you guys seemed to really like that video. So today I figured I'd do the reverse of it and rank the most overrated creatures in Ark because there's been no content updates for 2 months and everybody's kind of bored. Quick disclaimer, these creatures aren't actually all bad creatures by any means. They're just on this list because people seem to overinflate how good these creatures actually are in terms of the grand scheme of the game. At number 15, I have the Rex. The Rex is the least overrated creature on this list, but it's definitely still overrated in my opinion. It's been viewed as the best boss fighting option in the game for years. It's always been really good because of its tech saddle, and it's always been looked at as a very good stat to power option, especially with how easy it is to tame. Here's the reason I view the Rex as slightly overrated in 2025. The problem is the dinosaur released, and since its release, the Rex really hasn't had nearly as much utility as it used to have. The Rex used to be a top tier boss fighting choice for literally every single boss fight in the game, but now that the dinosaur is in the game, it's just a better version of the Rex for boss fights. It outputs more power, it has the Gigabyte which crushes flying bosses, it's arguably even easier to tame if you're decent at the passive taming method, and since the Dinosuchus' release, it's really just never been weaker than the Rex in terms of boss fighting capability. The Dinosuchus is also more versatile than the Rex because it has underwater capability as well. Basically, I'm saying the Rex isn't bad, it still has a tech saddle so it's still applicable to certain situations in the game. Its stats are definitely not terrible by any means, but the creature definitely needs something added to its kit or its stats improved for it to be back on par with the Dinosuchus for it to not be overrated anymore. At number 14, I have the Jerboa. The Jerboa is definitely a useful creature, but people overrate how useful it is all the time. Where the Jerboa shines is on Scorched Earth because it warns you about weather events that are coming up, and this can be useful because the weather events are really annoying sometimes. With that being said, it's pretty rare that a weather event actually gets you killed, and they are all temporary, so you can usually survive them even if you're out. It's definitely a useful tame, don't get me wrong. Getting warned about these is helpful because you can prepare for them, or if you're not ready for them, you can get back to your base. But in my opinion, the Jerboa should give you a lot more hyperthermic insulation than it does already because the map is so hot the entire time, it'd be very useful if the Jerboa just solved half that issue for you. I will say that it's really nice how easy it is to tame, getting a shoulder mount super early on is always a nice thing, and it's definitely very cute. But I just think that the usefulness for the Jerboa gets overstated all the time, and that's simply why it's on the list. It's not bad by any means, but it's also just not that good. Another creature that I think gets consistently overrated in Ark is the direwolf. The direwolf is definitely a pretty okay caving mount option, but in my opinion, there's so many better choices, and these better choices than the direwolf consistently get ranked lower than it when I look at videos online, when I look at people talking about the best caving mounts in the game. It just gets consistently overrated from what I've seen. On my cave creatures ranking video, I had it 12th, and arguably it should have been lower than that. The reason it's not that great is simply because it doesn't get a saddle. The problem of not having a saddle is you don't get that natural armor rating, so it's nowhere near as tanky as a lot of other caving options, even if its stats are slightly better. Not having a saddle in Ark really just hard caps a creature of how good it can be. Look at a creature like the Griffin, for example. The Griffin is a lot better of a creature than the direwolf, of course, but it doesn't have a saddle, which is pretty much the only thing holding it back from being a top 5 tame in the entire game. While I'm on the point of overrated caving creatures, the Megalania is also overrated, but I'm not going to go into a whole tangent about this. It's just not as good as people say it is. There's not enough people that overrate it for me to put it on the list, but there is a small group of people who swear by using this thing, and it's just okay. It just doesn't deal with bats well enough, in my opinion, for it to be an insanely good caving option, because if there's a lot of bats, you're just going to get rabies 20 times. At number 12, I have the Karka, and hear me out. Yes, obviously it's a good creature, but it's totally overrated. Every time I see the Karka vs Giga debate online for basically any application in the entire game, people are always like, well, the Karka's way better because when it's fully stacked, it's just so much better than the Giga. And you're right, yeah, when it's fully stacked, it's better. But the reality is, a lot of the time in Ark, you're not going to have a situation where you can get full stacks on a Karka, which is why the Giga is still better than the Karka in like 50% of situations. I'm going to make a whole video about the Giga vs Karka thing eventually because I think this is a topic that I need to talk about for a long time. But in my opinion, it's just overrated as a creature because people just say it's always better to use than the Giga, and I just firmly disagree with that statement. Just a brief breakdown really quickly on screen. I'm going to throw a table up here with the Karka vs Giga applications. The Karka is better at element veins by a pretty big margin. The Karka is faster for doing meat runs. And the Karka is probably slightly better for OSDs, but that gets inflated a lot. It's really not that much better than the Giga at OSDs. It can also go in the tech cave, which is really nice. And the Giga is substantially better at open world bosses. It's better in most PvP situations because, yet again, if you're fighting somebody randomly, you're not going to have all the time in the world to go get all the stacks for a Karka. And maybe if you're in open world, the Karka is better just because it's faster and you can play well enough to avoid the Giga hitting you, fair enough. But in certain situations like, for example, cave PvP or any enclosed space, the Giga is just better for sure. I also think the gap between where the Karka is better than the Giga versus where the Giga is better than the Karka favors the Giga as well. I think the Giga is substantially better at the tasks I said it was better at, while the Karka is only slightly better at the things I said it was better at. Yet again, I could break this down in a lot more detail, but I just think the Giga is simply almost as good as the Karka. It's not way worse. At number 11, I have the Bronto, and this creature isn't insanely overrated either, but it's just really not good. First of all, it's completely unusable in a lot of servers because it just crashes the entire server with how badly optimized it is. And secondly, the practical application of this being a really good berry harvester and this being tanky is just kind of lacking. The real issue the Bronto has, in my opinion, is it's just simply too slow. It moves so slowly around the map that the tankiness is still okay, but the berry harvesting is pretty bad. Unless your base is literally on top of a ton of bushes that you can just go out with the Bronto, swing once, get all the berries you need, and then go back into your base, it's really never worth using. It just takes forever to harvest. Even though it is good at harvesting and it has great weight, it's just not really worth the time. It's a shame too because the Bronto is an awesome creature. It's one of the most iconic creatures in the entire game, and it really needs some changes, but it just doesn't have them yet. While I'm on the topic of sauropods, I actually think all three are pretty overrated in the game. The Giganotus after the nerf is nowhere near as good as it used to be, and the Diplodocus is a terrible creature in general. Besides for taming Carcas, it has no use case in the entire game. But the Bronto is by far the most overrated out of the three, and I don't think the other two are overrated enough to make this list. At number 10, I have the Diplocaulus, which I actually like as a creature, but it's just overrated in terms of how useful and practical it is. The Diplocaulus' utility is giving you oxygen underwater and swimming pretty quickly while you grab onto it. This is really useful in the early game to go down and get silica pearls or oil before you have scuba unlocked, but there are two issues I have with the Diplocaulus. The major issue is that it spawns in the swamp, so it's a pain in the ass to tame because it's so weak. It's always in the water, so it's really hard to see, and it's in a very dangerous area, so it's a little bit more difficult to tame than it should be. The other issue with it being incredibly weak is two things. One, it doesn't get a saddle, so you're really screwed in terms of armor durability, and this thing will die really quickly to pretty much any threat. And when you're using this thing for its only application, you're in the deep underwater areas where there's other fast creatures. Yes, the Diplocaulus is fast, but there's other stuff like Zivactinus, which is just as fast. And if you dismount to farm something and something attacks your Diplocaulus, it's probably going to die, and then you're going to die at the bottom of the ocean drowning. It's definitely useful in certain situations, especially if you know how to use it properly, but there's so much that can go wrong with this, and the fact that it's pretty difficult to tame means it's not as useful in the early game as other creatures are. My personal preference in the early game, generally speaking, is just to use an Ichthyosaurus, swim down really quick, farm a little bit, and then swim back up before I fully drown. The Ichthyo is much easier to tame because it's a passive tame that spawns in safer areas, and you can get it a lot earlier in the game, it's much stronger, and you can use it for later game stuff like farming drops too. At number 9, I have the Phoenix, and this creature is also pretty good, especially after the new changes they made in Ascended, but it's still nowhere near as good as people give it credit for. The Phoenix is really fast, it can smelt stuff in its inventory, and it can give you silica pearls when it poops, which can be used as an automatic farm in the new game. It used to do this in Evolved as well, but it poops a lot more silica pearls now, so it's much better as an automatic farm option. With all that being said, it's very overstated how good this creature actually is in the game. The first and most glaring issue is that it's ridiculously obnoxious to tame, and for the reward you get after taming it, it's really just not worth the effort. The other thing is, besides the automatic silica pearl farm, there's really nothing the Phoenix does that's actually better than other creatures. Yes, it's able to smelt stuff in its inventory, and it is cool that it can smelt both food and metal at the same time. The issue with this though is that the weight isn't nearly good enough on it for this to be a practical way to smelt things. Its speed is also really great, and I will give it that, but the problem is, why are you even using this to travel around in the first place? What is it better at than other creatures? If you're trying to travel to go farm, bring a Rhino or bring an Argy. And if you're trying to go fight something, there's no way you're going on a Phoenix because stuff like a Managarmr is way better. Stuff like a Griffin is better. A Wyvern, a Voidworm, an Astrodelphus. There's so many choices that are more built for the PvP side of the game. Even a Skiff is way better. The reality is, it's just too difficult to tame for it to be worth it for anything besides a Silica Pearl farm. And people give it a lot more credit in the community than being a very inaccessible farm for an easy resource to get. So I say it's overrated. At number 8, I have the Lamantria, and this is probably the worst creature on the list. The Lamantria is just a terrible creature. People usually justify it as a really decent early game scorchless option to go get you a Wyvern or a better flyer, but in my opinion, it's never worth taming unless you're using it for very niche PvP situations. My problem with it is that I would rather just tame a Percoptodon. All you need to get a Percoptodon is a couple of rare mushrooms, which you can get by farming crystal around the map. And once you farm a bit of crystal and get the rare mushrooms, Percoptodons are pretty easy to tame because you have to trap it in a billboard and knock it out, and it's way better than the Lamantria in pretty much every single way once it's tamed. It's faster, more fun to use, has more farming versatility, is stronger, and you can easily use it to go get a Tapejara, which is easily the best creature on the map to go get a Wyvern egg with because it's actually fast enough to get away. The Lamantria is only at number 8 because I don't think it's nearly as hyped up as other creatures on the list, but it is just a terrible creature. At number 7, I have the Raptor, and there's really not much I have to say here. People love it and they use it a ton. They say it's a super awesome dinosaur in the early game and it's very strong for a lot of applications, but the reality is that's just not true. It's okay for early game caves, it'll keep you alive against beach level threats most of the time, but the stats really don't hold up. It doesn't have an amazing pack buff like other early game options you can use for fighting, and it really doesn't have any utility outside of being a very iconic dinosaur that people like. I do think that it really only gets overrated because the raptor is so popular, but it's just not a very good creature at all. I don't really ever tame them personally because I don't see a point in having them, to be honest. They don't really serve a purpose that I need. And while the raptor isn't inherently bad by itself, it just doesn't do anything special and gets overshined by so many other options. At number 6, I have the Moza, and this is one of the better creatures on the list, but it's still definitely an overrated creature. People talk about this thing like it's the best underwater creature in the game, and in my opinion, it's barely in the top 5. In terms of the value you get out of it, you have to go way deep underwater to tame it, you have to use a ton of narcotics and tranks to tame it, and once you have it, it's really not as useful as a lot of other creatures that are available. The best thing it has going for it is that it has really good stats and it has a tech saddle, and those things are really important, but the problem is it can get stunned. It also really is not nearly as maneuverable as it should be in my opinion. In my opinion, you should be able to pilot this thing like you pilot a Tapejara, so it really does suffer from having a pretty bad turn radius. With all these things considered, besides the motor fight, which it is really good for because it's so strong, I really don't ever use Mozas in the PvE side of the game because you can get stunned on it, and it's just a higher risk option than other tames like the Archelon, Basilosaurus, or Tuzo. And it's also more difficult to tame than those two, because the Tuzo you can easily tame with one shark or one carbon emis and some black pearls, the Basilosaurus is a passive tame, and the Archelon is of course easier to tame than a Moza. At number 5, I have the Galley. The Galley is a loved creature in the community, especially because Syntac, the most popular Ark YouTuber, loves it, but it's just not good. The main issue with it, in my opinion, is the HP pool is just unacceptably low. It dies to so many things. If you dismount it and leave it alone for 2 seconds, it's dead to a saber tooth. If you fall too far down a hill with it and don't dismount, you're probably just going to take half your HP. It's just a really flawed creature in that way. I think it just needs to be tankier. Its speed is also overrated in my opinion because it's a land creature, so even though it is really fast, there's just not really a big point in using this over a fast flyer or over a creature that can deal with the terrain better. The Galley can jump pretty horizontally far, but it can't really jump super vertically high. So if you're trying to travel across the map fast, something like a frog where you're chain jumping is probably going to be faster than it. And other creatures that are maybe not as fast like the dire bear are at least fast enough to keep up with it, and they're so much stronger. It does have the cool functionality of carrying that wagon cart around with it, but even then, there's other creatures that can do that just better than it does anyway. So I think the speed aspect of the Galley is overrated, and that's why I have it in 5th place. At number 4, I have the Dimorphodon, and I wasn't expecting to place this on the list, but after I made that ranking every creature video and I got 100 comments about how the Dimorphodon's an amazing creature, I had to put it on here. The Dimorphodon is a shoulder mount, which is nice, and it has really good stats for a shoulder mount too. It does great damage, it's pretty fast, and it's very easy to tame. With that being said, it's ridiculously overrated at the same time. It's by no means a really great shoulder mount because it doesn't offer any excess utility besides doing good damage. And the main utility I saw from people was saying to send a flock of them at something to crush it, but why would you even bother doing that? Bringing around a ton of Dimorphodons following you looks ridiculous, and you can just use one strong creature to do what these guys do. In PvP also, you can kill these in a couple of shots with a shotgun, even if you have really strong mutated Dimorphs, so it's not a super viable option there either. It's not a bad creature by any means, but there's better shoulder mounts in the game, and shoulder mounts are mainly there to serve you for utility in the game, like otters for insulation, or light pets to keep you away from Nameless. So I just really don't view the Dimorphodon as a top tier creature in the game, like a lot of people seem to think it is. At number 3, I have the Rock Golem, and this has been a beloved creature for years because it is really cool, but the utility for it is really just lacking, especially nowadays. This has pretty much just been a soaker for the entirety of its time in the game. There's no harvesting utility that's super insane for it. It is good for harvesting stone, but I still prefer Dodex by a mile for that. And it can't fight bosses, do any other objective. And for open world bosses, it's just nowhere near as strong as something like a Giga or a Dreadnoughtus because it just doesn't do nearly as much damage. Here's why it's on here though. People say it's a really amazing soaker, but in my opinion, it's pretty overrated in that regard. Even after the skill tree now allows you to get imprints on non-breedable creatures like the Rock Golem, which does make it significantly better by the way, and is a huge buff to creatures like the Rock Golem, it's still nowhere near as good of a soaker as something like a Stego or a Carbo because it's not as dispensable. You have to go out of your way and tame a Rock Golem every single time you want it to be a soaker, or clone it, which is expensive, compared to Stegos, which you can breed 1 million of. Also, the skill tree does allow you to put imprints on non-breedable creatures, but it doesn't allow you to get imprint on the cloned version of that creature, so you're only ever going to have the imprint on the one you tamed. And the other issue is that since you're taming it instead of breeding it, you can't spec all of its points into HP, which makes it worse than it could be. There's just so many practical issues here, even after the fact that you can get an imprint on it now in certain situations, that it's still on the list because it's just not an amazing tame. I think after the skill tree let you get imprints on stuff like Rock Golems and other non-breedable creatures, people view this as a super OP thing in the game now, but it's just stronger than it was before. It's still not an amazing choice in my opinion. I think the way you could fix this creature is just adding more harvesting ability to it because the utility side of the game for it is just lacking heavily. There's a TLC mod for it that I showed off in a video recently that'll link at the end of this video that shows a really awesome version of the Rock Golem, and if that version was in the game, it'd be an amazing creature. But with how it is now in the current game, I really just don't see it being a super good creature, and people do tend to overrate it. At number 2, I have the wyverns. All 4 of the main wyverns, what I'm talking about, but the other ones are also pretty overrated in my experience. Those include the crystal wyverns and the voidworm. The best wyverns like the lightning wyvern and the poison wyvern are probably some of the best creatures on this list, but it doesn't mean they're not overrated. Here's the thing with wyverns. They're strong, they're fast, they're definitely cool, and they have versatile abilities that are really fun to use. But the thing is, they're not as good as people say. For example, people look at them as one of the fastest traveling mounts in the game, and that's really not even true. The tropical crystal wyvern is one of the fastest creatures in the game, but even that is nowhere near as fast as a Maywing or a Mayguana. And the turn radius on pretty much every wyvern sucks. Obviously, the crystal wyverns yet again are smaller, so it's not as bad, but they're way weaker, so there's trade-offs. People also seem to feel that after they've been able to breed and they added the bisons to make it even easier to get wyverns, that they got way better. But in my opinion, the breeding thing is nice for sure, getting imprints, but it doesn't have a saddle anyway, so it can't be super strong in battle. And even though, yes, the lightning wyvern, voidworm, and poison wyvern do have niche use cases, in general, they're not the strongest flyers for PvP in the game. One really good example of the wyvern being overrated is actually in my pole tournaments I've been running on my channel recently. You can see here that the ice wyvern smoked the woolly rhino, and spoiler alert, the ice wyvern, even after they added more utility and ascended, is still one of the worst wyverns in the game, and is nowhere near as good as woolly rhinos. This is obviously one pick in a vacuum, and I'm not going to use it for my entire ranking, but people seem to think wyverns are the end-all be-all and every single type of wyvern is amazing. There's really only 1 or 2 types of wyverns that are even worth being in this conversation, which is the lightning wyvern and the poison wyvern. And even then, it depends on what game mode you're playing, because the poison wyvern is basically useless in PvE. The wyverns aren't bad, they're just so overrated. And last, but certainly not least, at number 1, the most overrated creature in the game is the Allosaurus. It's just bad. Nah, I'm just kidding. Let's actually go through why it's bad. It has a good pack buff and it can inflict bleed, which I do really like about the Allo, but the problem is its stat pool is not good enough to hold up in the meta. Other options like the Thyla or the Deinonychus are simply better. The Deinonychus can also bleed bosses, which the Allosaurus is incapable of doing, and the Thyla is just a lot stronger than a single Allo and can be way better in caves than Allos. People just really love this creature, and I've never found a reason to use it in my entire time playing Ark. I understand it is actually a decent creature in itself, but when you compare it to other options that do the exact same job, it's just a worse version of those creatures. There's really nothing else I can say here. It's weaker than the strong carnivores like Rexes, it's weaker than the bleed dealers like the Thyla and the Deinonychus because it has less utility, so it's just kind of in an awkward middle pack where there's not really that much of a reason to use this thing. There are some applications where you can definitely get good value out of having Allosaurus, but yet again, even for those situations, you can just use a Thyla or a Deinonychus pack. Anyway, that's my list. Hopefully you enjoyed. Thank you to all my members for helping the channel out. I'm actually starting to release some members-only content really soon, which should be a lot of fun. I'm actually really excited to release that, so stay tuned for that. And if you guys want to have some mods to fix a lot of these creatures that I think just need some tweaks in the game, as well as others, check out the video linked on screen now, which ranks the 15 best TLC creature mods in the entire game. These mods bring back a lot of OG creatures and make them a lot better for 2025 Ark, and it's so much more fun to play Ark with these mods. So click the video linked on screen, and I'll see you there. Peace!